Tip O'Neill, the late Speaker of the House of Representatives in Washington, D.C., he loved to tell the following little vignette that's a twist on the familiar Bible story about Jesus feeding the 5,000 over there in John chapter 5. A preacher stood up one Sunday, said O'Neill, and included the story in his sermon, how Jesus fed the crowd of people. Well, unfortunately, the minister got just a little bit confused the way he told it. Jesus fed 5 people with 5,000 loaves and 2,000 fishes. Well, half the audience didn't pick up the mistake, but one dear old saint on the very front row noticed, and she was highly amused. Feeding 5 people with 5,000 loaves and 2,000 fishes? Big deal, she announced in a stage whisper that you could hear throughout the church. I could do that myself. Of course, this added to the minister's embarrassment. So the following week, he addressed the same topic again. I want to correct my story from last week, he confessed. Actually, Jesus fed 5,000 people with 5 loaves and 2 fishes. And then he just couldn't help himself. Turning to the sister in the front row, he asked, "Now, Sister Jones, do you think you could do that?" Well, the lady thought for just a moment and then said, "Yes, Reverend, I believe I could." Well, the church members leaned forward in amazement, and so did the minister. Now, Sister Jones, really? 5,000 people with 5 loaves and 2 fishes? How could you do it? The old sister smiled with confidence. "I'd use all the leftovers from last week." Well, have you ever really stopped and put yourself in this particular Bible story? The feeding of the 5,000. Now imagine that you're there. You've been listening and watching all day as this man named Jesus taught and told stories and healed, and it's fascinating. Crippled people throwing away their crutches and running up and down the hillside like giddy children. Blind people exclaiming in amazement as they look out to the blue Sea of Galilee for the first time. Deaf people healed, and the first sound they hear is the voice of Christ. Children who've been sick all their lives are suddenly well and completely healed of the diseases, jumping up and down like it's Christmas morning. And then to listen to this Jesus teaching stories like you've never heard. And even though it goes on for hours, you just don't notice the time going by. Until now. All of a sudden, it's dark. The sun is setting, and people begin to look around. Maybe it's time to leave. And just at that very moment, 5,000 people realize how hungry they are. It's sort of a community reaction. Nobody remembered to eat any lunch. It was just a fascinating, exciting day that had just overloaded their physical senses. But now, it's supper time. In fact, supper's long overdue. Well, you no doubt know the story. Jesus says to his disciples, "We need to feed these people. We've kept them here all day. They've got to be starving." I think one of the reasons people love this story, besides the fact, of course, of its miraculous conclusion, is because it shows us a Savior who cares about us. Here's a Jesus who notices our physical hunger. After a long, tiring day of ministry, his thoughts are still of others. Instead of thinking of himself, how can I get away from here and enjoy a hot meal and a bath and a relaxing evening? He turns to his disciples and says, "Hey, are you hungry? All these kids here, they've got to be starving by now. What can we do to help them?" Our good friends at the It Is Written television program, where I served for 5 years with George Vandeman early in my ministry, they have as their theme, "Man shall not live by bread alone, but by every word that proceeds from the mouth of God." But isn't it great to discover a Jesus who knows that people don't live by bread alone, but they do live by bread? Jesus cared about people's needs and their hungry stomachs. So he says, what can we do to help these people? And the disciples answer, Well, Lord, there's got to be 5,000 people here. Just men. There's probably 5,000 of them alone, plus their wives and their kids. Lord, even if food was available, there's no way we could even come up with enough for every person here to have a single bite. This is impossible. In fact, they protest. It would take 8 months' salary to give them anything. It's strange, but perhaps not surprising, that the disciples didn't seem very aware of Jesus' power, even after watching him work miracles all day. We're in a hopeless situation, they moaned, forgetting that they were with the Savior. And listen, don't we do the same? Writer and theologian Edward Hastings wrote once about how we sometimes complain of hopelessness after years of watching Jesus work mighty things. But Jesus, always patient, says very simply to his disciples, what have you got? What have you got? I love that verse. Really, it's only the Gospel of Mark out of the 4 of them that puts it that way. Jesus asked the disciples, what resources have you got? Now think about this with me for a moment. All day long, Jesus had been healing, creating wellness out of thin air. Jesus was a creator. He could make something out of nothing. And he'd been doing that all day long. And of course, Christians believe that it was Jesus Christ, the Son, who had created the world and the entire universe out of a vast nothingness. And here he says to his 12 disciples, what have you got? Why? Isn't it true that Jesus could have fed 5,000 people or 1,000,000 people with just a miraculous snap of his fingers? Centuries earlier, he had sent manna falling from heaven to feed a vast nation. 6 days a week for 40 years, Jesus fed people from nothing. He sent quail for them to eat. Jesus had a proven track record of providing gourmet meals from scratch, something out of nothing. Why then did he say to his disciples, what have you got? Mark chapter 6 and verse 38. How many loaves do you have? Go and see. Well, we all know there were 5 loaves and 2 fishes to feed 5,000 men plus women and children. 5 small loaves and 2 very ordinary sized fishes. Jesus may as well have started with nothing. But he wanted to start with what there was. And there's a lesson for us to grab hold of today. Jesus wants to take what you have and work with that. Whatever talents you have right now. Whatever resources, whatever abilities. Those are what he wants to begin with. That's his starting place. He wants to work his miracles with your help. He wants to use your little sack lunch to feed maybe an entire multitude. There's a little chapel in the town of Guernsey, England, that is covered with beautiful mosaics. The walls are exquisitely decorated in living color. Visitors come in to savor the unique artistic impressions created there. But do you know what the mosaics are made from? One writer described it as clinker and odd material from the waste heap. Those walls are covered with beautiful color made by pieces of broken cups left by the visitors over the years. Little shattered pieces of pottery have been carefully reassembled and lovingly formed into a mosaic that testifies to our Creator's salvaging skill. Oh, friends, that's Jesus. Intensely loving people and sensing their needs, and then working with their meager offerings to satisfy not only their needs, but the needs of those around them. Do you remember that Jesus turned water into wine, not nothing into wine. And remember, he said to Peter, go catch a fish, and in that fish's mouth is a coin for the temple tax. He took a little bit of mud, used that mud, put it on that man to heal his eyesight, and then said to the man, now go and wash that mud away. That's your part. There is something in your life right now, friend, that Jesus can use. I don't know what it is, but he does. Some talent that maybe you've kind of hidden away, some skill, some resource, maybe some intangible gift that looks right now like a mashed up little sack lunch, some day-old pieces of bread, no butter, and 2 small fishes. You don't even have a cookie. But if you bring what you have to the Savior, just like that nameless, anonymous boy in this old Bible story, loved by millions, maybe, just maybe, another miracle might be about to happen.